There we go. Hello, Jean. Welcome to this Insights from Experts interview. And for our audience, this is Jean Kaplansky, a long-term Componize customer. And Kaplan, where Jean works, has been a pioneer in expanding educational access and transforming learning through new technologies. With over 1 million students and thousands of clients and university partners, Kaplan has the expertise, the passion, and the continuous innovation to help you achieve your educational and career goals. Welcome, Jean. Could you take a minute to introduce yourself and Kaplan, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm Jean Kaplansky. I'm the Senior Manager of Content Operations, Content Strategy for the Product Implementation and Enablement team. And that is out of our commercial products office, and it is part of Kaplan North America. Kaplan North America is a group of different Kaplans that got pulled together into one big company a couple of years ago when they made Kaplan North America. So Kaplan Test Prep, Kaplan Publishing, Kaplan Higher Ed, all of these things were separate businesses, and they all came together as one business. So then came the job of, okay, what do we do with the content from all of these disparate businesses, but businesses that had the same name?
Okay, thank you very much for that. In this interview, we're going to look at your particular use case. Kaplan uses Componize for creating, managing, and publishing pipelines. And you've put all this together in a unique combination, putting together different tools to be able to respond to your different objectives. First of all, let's look at the challenges that are related to your industry, test preparation and tutoring. What are the challenges specific to your industry?
So challenges specific to the industry of test prep are that, one, we cover pretty much every possible career line out there. We go from engineering to nursing and everything in between. We do pre-college, we do higher ed, we do continuing education, and a lot of it is licensure. So what is the biggest challenge is that a lot of these tests change year to year. So we have to constantly keep up with the tests in terms of like the content that we can publish as study content, and how we get that content out to students. We do have live classes that are going on for some groups. And we do have a lot of external subject matter experts who are contributing directly to our content.
Okay, so like, yeah, loads of contributors. That's like a whole load of management, isn't it? What are the challenges specific to Kaplan itself?
So the challenges specific to Kaplan and the challenges specific to us is that we're coming from a situation where we're basically merging a whole 3 or 4 different companies, and those 3 or 4 different companies each have their own way of doing content management and publishing and production. Once we merged those 3 different companies, it became quickly obvious that that was not sustainable in terms of we were paying a lot of money for these disparate content management systems and authoring tools. So the decision was made to go with one CCMS, which is Componize, and on top of Alfresco, and to go with one authoring tool, which is Oxygen Web Author. And that means that all of the proprietary tools that people were using before are no longer in use, and we are only paying for one content management system and a set of authoring tools related to that content management system, instead of content management and authoring tools times 3, plus the people needed that to run all of that.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so since we're on tools, you've been able to
Yep.
push contents to different platforms. You're doing quite a lot of unique stuff. What are these tools, these platforms? What are they? Tell me a little bit more.
Okay. So the platform that we're using right now, and this is alongside with Componize as our business partner, we have Alfresco, and we're using the freemium or the open source edition. On top of Alfresco, we have Componize. And then we have another layer on top of that, which is Oxygen Web Author, which is fairly new product. Oxygen XML editor has been around forever. Oxygen Web Author, as a concept, has been around for a long time, but as a product, it has only been around since about 2020, I think. And then we have yet another layer on top of Oxygen Web Author, which is we have wireless math type as a plugin, because a lot of the content that we do, whether it's medical or engineering or whatnot, is heavy on math. Pretty much everything we do is heavy on the math. It could be pre-college. It's definitely going to be heavy on the math. And if it's something like LSAT or GMAT or GRE or something like that, still heavy on math. The math never seems to go away for a lot of these professions.
Okay, and then what about where you push the content to?
Okay, so the content goes from production. It goes in a couple of different directions. So we do have a group of people who are actually using DITA, and they are single sourcing out of DITA, and they do other production through the Open Toolkit. And then there's production that goes on beyond that for them to get any kind of, like, if they need an EPUB or if they need any kind of print product, there's a production team for that. We have other production options. We have a bunch of LMSs, or learning management systems. Our primary learning management system is Atom, and most of our content is targeted at Atom. So we have a rather large pipeline to have an integration between Alfresco and our LMS so that we can push the content from Alfresco over to the LMS for delivery to the students out there. And the LMS has an editor that organizes everything into courseware and does the pieces that make everything hang together in between. So we are currently working with multiple LMSs, which is probably a good thing. It makes us a little bit more agile. We're not completely 100% with one LMS, but we are targeting the Atom LMS, which is our internal LMS, or the internally built LMS that we have focused on for the last few years.
Okay. And you mentioned, you author in DITA. You also author in other standards. Can you tell me a little bit about these?
Yeah, so the unique thing, this is probably the most unique thing about Kaplan North America, because I've been in a lot of different companies, and at other companies, we have really focused on, 25 years ago, it was every educational publishing company had one DTD, and it was always like SendPub or Pearson Pub or whatever. It was they would take something like DocBook, and then they would add a bunch of educational stuff to the DTD itself. This is back when an XML publishing worked with DTDs. And what we are doing now is, with Kaplan coming together with 4 different companies, we actually have a combination of DITA content, DocBook content, and HTML content. I'd say about 70% of our content is in DITA. Or actually, I'm sorry, 70% of our content is in HTML.
Okay.
And we just finished a huge HTML migration. About 10% of our content is in DocBook, and about the remaining 20% is in DITA.
All right, that's a unique mix, and you're able to handle
It is.
all of
It
that.
is. Yeah, we have to handle all of that just because of where we're coming from. Getting everybody into one CMS and one authoring tool. We knew that Oxygen Web Author could handle all three doc types. And we worked really closely with Componize to get functionality in there for XHTML and DocBook, alongside the DITA functionality that that Componize is focused on. But it is as far as we could push it for a company that is very much still going through that merging new working processes, new tools, new procedures type of thing. So you can't rip the entire rug out from under people. You have to let them have some things that they are familiar with. So they get to keep their doc types for now. And we'll see what happens in the future. No decisions have been made.
All right. Well, Componize is able to handle all the different types of input that you're putting in. It's open architecture is what allows for that. So you're able to do something that quite a few companies can only dream of,
Right. I mean, and this seems to be a trend, is like a lot of the software as a service companies out there will take they'll take one doc type and they'll focus on that doc type. And if they don't like that doc type, they'll take another doc type that they do like and they'll kind of munge it until they have something that they like. And then they'll sell the platform as a service. So that's everything. Your editing, your reviewing, your creation, and your publishing routines would go all through the platform. And that's good, but it also means that these companies are very much locked in to using that particular doc type, that particular platform. Componize gives us the option of having a CMS, and with the flexibility of the doc type and the other kinds of documents that you could store in Alfresco, that means we can pretty much go in any direction we want. If there's an API, Componize can talk to it. So that makes Componize an advantage to us on that one.
Yep, definitely not a closed system.
It's not a closed system. And we have to keep it, we use the freemium version because of Alfresco licensing rules. We have people all over the world, SMEs, who are subject matter experts, who are professionals and in their own professional setting when they're writing questions, especially in the medical professions. And so they are not Kaplan employees, and they need access to the system so they can get these questions written. And most of the content that we do is actually test questions. So we call them, we mostly call them QID, question ID. But it's basically a huge test bank that gets organized in different ways.
Excellent. So with all the different writing standards that you've got, the different tools that you're putting together, what are the advantages that you find in that?
So the advantages is we just went through a huge migration. We got all of our HTML content off the previous platform and migrated into Alfresco. It was a large migration. It took the last 3 months of 2022, and it was another probably 2 years in the planning to get to that point. So a lot of different pieces went into it in terms of working with Componize and Componize partners. And there's the training aspect for all the people who are going from the old platform to the new platform. We have a new authoring tool. It kind of sort of looks like the old authoring tool, but it does behave differently. So they do need to have the training. They do need to understand a little bit more about proper XML markup, because we've moved from what was essentially HTML5 to XHTML. So we are really validating the content in a way that we weren't validating it before. And now that we've got a true XML parser in there, it's picking up all sorts of little things that we would have straightened out had we known before, but we're cleaning it up now. And so far it's, there are some things that are manual right now, like how we push our content from Alfresco over to our LMS is a bit of a manual process, but we're working on automating that. And nobody's running around screaming with their hair on fire. So I'm going to take that I'll take that as a sign of a partial success, if not, all full success. But we've, like I said, spent a lot of time, and we've had to do the same. The DITA people were probably the most well established because they didn't have to go anywhere. They were already on Componize. They were already using another authoring tool. We did introduce another authoring tool to them, but they knew their markup so well that it really didn't. It wasn't something that was a significant thing for them. It was just basically, putting something else in front of them on a daily basis.
New buttons to click.
New buttons to click, different UI, things like that. Yeah.
All right. Now, looking at, from what you've just described, you must have some massive silos, and bringing them all together under Componize is something. I attended a conference a while ago, and I had one of the conference speakers talking about we've been trying to break silos. We've been talking about let's break silos, but the approach that we should be taking, which is the approach that you seem to have taken, is to rather than break silos, connect them, make little tunnels between them, and then each group can still keep their little silo, the little things that they do in that particular to their side of work, and but still collaborate. It sounds brilliant.
Within reason. Yeah, within reason. So it's true. We're a corporation. So any big company, any ed tech company, or any other publishing company has a lot of different divisions, a lot of different business units, and so there's going to be silos. You're never going to get rid of silos. That's not happening.
No.
But you can connect the silos together. You can start the conversation between the different groups, and you can kind of do the detective sleuthing to figure out where the differences are and where things kind of bump up against each other in a bad way, and where duplication of effort might be. But that's something that takes time, honestly, in merging a company to work on. I once worked for a company where they had 36 documentum instances and they wanted one. That was a project. Yes. So yeah, it's just a matter of listening and understanding the various different requirements from the various different product lines, and also getting a little bit of the history of why they did what they did, because there was a reason.
Yeah.
And it worked for them, but it may not be something that will work going forward.
Exactly. And harmonizing processes makes them more efficient.
Yeah. Harmonizing as much as we can. As much as, because we're always going to have some people who are just going to put on the brakes, and they're going to resist as much as possible. And that's not a really good choice for them. Because it just doesn't work. It doesn't help the situation when we're trying to merge a company together rather than split people apart. So.
All right, thanks. You've used other CCMSs before. What positives have you drawn from using Componize?
So Componize, I like the flexibility of Componize. The fact that Componize is a layer on top of Alfresco, which makes it XML aware, is really flexible. It's mostly DITA and CCMS, but the fact that we are doing 3 different doc types in Componize is a testament. The other thing about content management systems is that a lot of people have been tying, this is my current soapbox, is a lot of people are trying to treat content, so publishing content or test content or other content that is not data, but they're trying to treat it like data. So Docs as Code is a good example.
Yeah.
They're trying to treat content as data. And one of our former platforms actually was all built on SVN. Every single project was another SVN project. Well, you can't share across SVN projects, not easily anyway. And going into one big kind of pool with Alfresco means we have sharing possibilities that we did not have in the past. I mean, we already are single sourcing on the DITA side. We haven't even begun to explore what we can do with like the medical content we have for the different levels of somebody's education and career, or things like, you know, nursing for and doctors, medical, you know, and then specialties and things like that. There's a lot of content that is not necessarily repetitive either. It's incrementally, you know, more complex. So that is a big thing right there. Getting out of something that locks us into a content management system, into a specific form, and something that has flexibility, because we can put other things in Alfresco too, and then people often do. We do have the Google Docs aspect turned on, or the Google Docs plugin is turned on. Not that we're publishing from Google Docs, we don't, but some people want to put Google Docs up there, and they can.
It'll handle it as an electronic content management system.
And it's interesting because I come from the world of single source publishing, XML, where you have you know, your Arbortext Content Manager and Ixisoft and you know, Visant and the various traditional content management systems. I mean, I started with Documentum, and it's very, very different from where content management systems are, because Alfresco is a lot closer to SharePoint than it is to Documentum or to an Ixisoft. The fact that you can do the single sourcing out of Componize and Alfresco is an added plus to that.
Definitely. And so, well, I mean, you've sort of stated some of it, but what are your reasons for staying with Componize?
So, yeah. So we've been with Componize for like 9 years, 10 years, something like that. It precedes me. But one of the things that I noticed in when I first started, when I was working closely with Jean-Luc and Frank, is that there is a trusted advisor relationship that we have with Componize. And a good example is at one point, I was talking to Jean-Luc, and like, are we supposed to, you know, what's the point of staying on the freemium version of Alfresco instead of buying licenses? Should we buy licenses? And he is very straightforward with me. He's like, I'd love to sell you licenses, but it won't work for your scenario because you have too many people who don't work for the company who need access to your system. And, you know, so I had a software vendor who essentially is a license reseller telling me he wasn't going to sell me licenses because it wasn't right for my platform.
We're not here to sell just the tool.
Things like that. Right. And Frank has been an incredible help to us in that he has been guiding our implementation and the complexity of the implementation all along the way. So it's not usual for a CTO to be doing that. I know he's got a lot of people working on whatever Componize is working on for the next generation.
Componize review.
But somebody's got to keep the old Componize CCMS. The lights have to be on and the trains have to be running. So
definitely. And just a quick explanation for everyone. Jean-Luc is the CEO of Componize, and Frank Shipley is the Chief Technology Officer. So Jean has direct access to both of them. They keep providing good advice and good support. One of the reasons why he's staying on with us.
As far as I'm concerned, yes.
Excellent. What are the content creation challenges that you've envisaged for the future?
Content challenge. Okay. Some of these are like, they're the continual content challenges that you experience in any single sourcing, multiple output environment. Things like the little details of how do you author table markup? What do you do with math? Do you use MathML or do you use images? And what do you do to make all of this accessible? And another thing is that there is like a test question interoperability standard out there, IMS QTI, which is part of First Ed Global or something. They changed their name. They used to be IMS. And that is something that we don't use. We went from using IMS QTI to actually moving away from it because we had so many different types of questions that we needed to be able to work with, and we're all in one big pool. It was important that we have the markup that facilitates the LMS, has the markup that facilitates the content and the writing of the content. And so the decision was made that we were going to use a question markup that can go back to IMS QTI if required in some instances, but is more flexible for our immediate needs. So the day-to-day things of new authors, people who aren't familiar with single sourcing, for a lot of people, this isn't their first rodeo. And for a lot of people, they're like, scared to touch the keyboard. So there's a lot of hand-holding. Mm-hmm. There's always a lot of hand-holding. But the authoring anomalies and things like that, those don't ever go away. You're always going to have somebody who's going to use the wrong markup at the right in the wrong place, and you're always going to have to go back and fix it. Mm-hmm. And just like I worked with a bunch of different files that had math as images last night, and all of that math needs to be converted to MathML. Yeah. So, that's a continual thing, especially when you have as much content as we do.
Yeah.
So.
All right. And what do you think your vision for the content of content creation at Kaplan is? What's next?
So the future for content creation at Kaplan is, right now we've just gotten everybody into Alfresco and into OWA, and the analogy I make a lot of analogies, but the analogy here is that since we just got everybody into this environment, I kind of want everybody to acclimate. Mm-hmm. I've made references to like when you get tropical fish, they come in a bag and you float the bag in the tank for a while before you let them free. I would say that we're letting people get acclimated to their new fish tank. And that is, stay the course, keep the trains running, let people get settled and let them get familiar with their tools. Yeah. The plans for content creation going forward are not that different than they are now. It's what we do with the content. And so there are a lot of different learning management systems out there, but there are also a lot of different functionality or features in learning management systems. Some learning management systems have computer assisted testing, and that basically means that they have the capability to allow a student to test out of things that they've already mastered and move on to the stuff that they need to learn. And we also have within that some very, very complex questions that come directly from the various testing organizations or the people who make up the professional organizations. Like NCLEX has a next generation testing. And so NCLEX NGN is a very complex thing. It has a lot of metadata to it. But furthermore, the questions themselves are very different from just a single test question. They're really more like scenarios that have 6 questions attached in some places. So it's a lot of complex content, and somebody has to figure out how to get that complex content together and how to tell the authors how to write that complex content. So that is a big deal with a lot of our different professional organizations that are saying this is what our content, our licensure test is going to look like in the future. So we have to go along with that in order to help people prepare.
All right, excellent.
So,
and what are your long-term goals, both personally and for Kaplan content creation?
My long-term goals, let's see. I will have my 3rd report starting at the end of February. So one of my long-term goals is to model a good management relationship between a very small team where the manager is in one continent and the team is on another, because all the people who report to me are in India.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, and it's significant because I used to work at Aptara, so I have experience working with people in India. But this is my first foray into people management. And so it's on me to like get a team dynamic going. And to not only do that, but get a team dynamic going across cultures as well as across continents. So there's like a little bit added on top of the regular people management part of things. I have a corresponding manager in India who works with me for like HR stuff, but that's where I'm going right now is more in that management direction, and mentoring people on how to use the various technologies. As far as our system, we just want to get everybody acclimated, and then we're going to talk more about process management and workflows and taxonomies. And eventually we will look at the content and we'll figure out whether we want to migrate content away from HTML, or if we want to migrate content to HTML, or if we want to migrate DocBook to DITA. Those decisions have yet to be made. It's too early for that.
That's it. I mean, you've only just completed migration not too long ago, so you want to get things settled down, embed, get everyone on board using the tools comfortably before the next big move.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, Jean. It was a pleasure spending, this only half an hour, but it's great talking to you. We always manage to have a nice long chat anytime we have a chat. And this time, I'm going to be publishing what we were talking about. So thank you very much for agreeing to this Insights with Experts interview. And I wish you luck.
Thank you for having me.
It's not a problem. Thank you very much. Wish you luck with all your content, strength, and more grease to your elbow.
Thanks. We need it.
Thanks.
All right.